One of the most interesting and exciting and adventurous elements of a public speaking class, I think, can be impromptu speaking. At Clover Park Technical College, there's certainly a lot that I try to do in this regard. I would say that it's been one of the most wildly popular elements of the public speaking class that I teach, in fact. If you'll go to the folder under the Lessons tab which says Impromptu Speaking, you'll see things in it which begin to provide some background and explanation for what I try to do in our class. I will say this, however, that this is a component of the course that I really have wanted for many years to increase or enlarge. I've still never been able to find all the time I want to do that, but I'm working on it. Perhaps you in your class will have fewer assigned speeches that students prepare for and will be able to make more time for impromptu speaking. As I say, I've often wanted to do that myself. This kind of speaking is invariably popular with our students. At the end of the quarter, when I give them an anonymous online survey, they almost invariably say that they wish we had had more impromptu speaking. This is despite the fact that when students actually do these speeches, they're sometimes really nervous, sometimes even humiliated, even though I try to make it clear to them that there's no reason to feel humiliated. I guess they don't really feel humiliated, but sometimes embarrassed and chagrined, perhaps would be a better term for it. Anyway, the fact that an impromptu speech is one for which the students have no lengthy period of time to prepare, I think gives them a kind of a thrill. It's the suspense. There's nothing like the moment at which a person finds out what his or her topic is and gasps or smiles or leaps with joy sometimes, or seems to be really happy, or seems to be distressed, or seems to be angered, or there are all kinds of emotional responses. And I think the students themselves, when they get the topics, as well as the audience, seem to enjoy that kind of unexpected new information and new circumstance. The purpose of assigning students impromptu speech topics, of course, is primarily to help them think on their feet, because I explain to them, as you well know, that there are lots of times in our lives as students, as workers, as members of families, when we are expected to respond to a question or a prompt of some sort and speak without having any time to write something down or think about our response in great detail and at great length, just sort of the way I'm doing this right now, as a matter of fact. I explain to them that there are different kinds of impromptu speaking. I ask them for examples from their own lives. They often talk about weddings or sometimes job interviews or situations in a meeting where someone says, "What do you think about such and such?" even though you haven't really been thinking about such and such carefully for a while. So I ask them for these examples. I give them examples of my own. Often we talk about impromptu speaking before we get to speech 4, which is the "Why You Should Hire Me" speech, which is very opportune because I explain to them that, of course, when they have a sample job interview as part of speech 4, even though it's not graded, it is going to put them on the spot just the way they will be put on the spot in the real world when they're exposed to a job interview. I also believe that one of the purposes of a good impromptu speech is to show that a student not only can think quickly on his or her feet, but also that there's some foundation upon which the person speaks. In other words, there has to be some background knowledge. There has to be some substance to the person and some acquaintance with various topics. Now, the way this works in our class is that the topics come from, or have come from, the students themselves over the years. There was a time in the first 5 years of the class when I would ask students on a Friday to bring 3 domestic topics and 3 international topics to class. We would then type those up, fixing the spelling and eliminating things that were inane or impossible for the average student to respond to. Then we would keep those topics and save them for impromptu speeches. The way this works now is that we have so many of these topics that I don't need to ask students for anymore. I do tell them, however, that the topics that they're going to have in the class now came from other students like themselves. So they're not meant, the topics are not meant to be arcane or impossible for people to talk about. On the contrary, they should be something that any college student ought to be able to talk about. Here's the container that we use. You can see that it is full of little laminated strips of paper that have topics on them. I'll just pick one at random here. Passport prices. Then pick another one. That would be, I suppose, a domestic topic with international ramifications. Gas prices, a perennial topic. The prairies. This was a fun one. It's on the YouTube site with the guy talking about prairie dogs and Little House on the Prairie, I believe. Fast food. You can see that these topics are really not anything that the average college student shouldn't be able to talk about. Now, clearly, there's more to talking about these things than knowing what the topics are. I give the students usually a sample of an impromptu speech that I give based on a topic from this very container. I tell them there are two kinds of impromptu speeches. There's type 1 and there's type 2. Type 1 is one in which the speaker simply says, my topic is such and such, and begins talking for, in our case, 1 to 2 minutes. They can go as long as 2.5 minutes. But in a type 1 speech, there's no particular organization, no particular sequencing, no particular parallel structure at all in the person's comments. It's just a free flow of information or a thought, sort of stream of consciousness. Whereas in a type 2 impromptu speech, I show the students that it can be almost identical in structure to a good speech of any sort. That is to say, it should have a strong introductory comment, the grabber. It should introduce the subject and preview the main points. It should have main points. It should summarize the main points, and it should end with something powerful as well. When they see me do this in various ways, I think it convinces them, at least to some degree, that it's possible to do this effectively. Now, many of them usually stick to the type 1 speech. Depending upon the time we have, what I'd really like to do is give every student in every class a chance to do a type 1 speech first, even if he or she doesn't meet the minimum time of 1 minute, and then go into some thoughtful, carefully reasoned planning of type 2 speeches, so that perhaps we would brainstorm, perhaps I would pull out a topic and we would brainstorm 3 main points about that topic together. Now, I don't know what the best pedagogy is in terms of helping students develop the skills that go into making a good type 2 impromptu speech. That's one reason why I'm really interested in delving more into this kind of speaking, so that I can find out what is the best way, what's the best process to help students acquire that kind of skill. I will say, and I tell the students, that a person who can do that is going to really impress an audience. I tell them, and you've heard this I'm sure too, that a good impromptu speech should sound as though it's been prepared for 2 weeks. Likewise, a speech that's been prepared for 2 weeks should sound like it's an impromptu one. It should have spontaneity and a sense of expectant energy and organic development. So these are the kinds of things I've done thus far in trying to prepare students for good impromptu speaking. On the schedule for our classes, most quarters I have 1 day or perhaps 2 days that I call impromptu fests. The purpose there is to make sure that every student in the class who's there on that particular day does get a chance to do impromptu speaking. We don't grade the speeches. Occasionally we have time to talk about them in some detail. Usually we don't, simply because we don't have the extra time after all 7 speeches that are assessed and graded are done. However, once again, I think the opportunity for you as an instructor at your institution may be there to really concentrate and focus and explore the nature of impromptu speaking in a way that takes the students from a stage of apprehension and uncertainty and perhaps just some raw energy that is okay, to a position where they are skilled and confident and capable and influential as impromptu speakers. That's what I'm really hoping will happen for them. I will say also that most quarters, at the very least, we're able to start almost every class period after about the 4th or 5th week with an impromptu speech. This has been somewhat satisfactory in the sense that there's always somebody there who will do this, but the problem with that is that sometimes people aren't really all there, physically or mentally, in the first few minutes of the class. People have suggested that maybe if someone comes in late, he or she should be expected to do an impromptu speech. But I hesitate to do that because I think it sends the wrong message. It seems to be almost a kind of reward. At the very least, it's attention paid to someone for coming late, which I just as soon not do. I'd rather that we focus our attention as a class on people and behaviors that are available right at the time the class begins, because we don't have a lot of extra time in a 50-minute period. We don't even have a lot of extra time in a 2-hour class if it's in a 2-hour mode. Again, I think impromptu speaking can be really exciting and thrilling. I hope that you will find some of the things in the materials that I have on the Angel site to be valuable to you. I welcome your suggestions and your experience with teaching students impromptu speaking, because I think, again, it's a really fertile area for improvement and growth and also intellectual development.